Hello and welcome to the Dragon Armory anew. This is part of an ongoing series of deep dives into various aspects of the board game Kingdom Death Monster. Today we are looking at the Node 3 quarry monster, the Dragon King, its crafting location, which is unlocked when you defeat the Dragon King for the first time. Before we get into all of the nitty gritty, I'd just like to say a couple of things in respect to the Dragon King itself, which is, first of all, it's a really good showdown fight. It's well designed. It feels very much like you are tackling and facing a powerful, huge monster, and that is incredibly fun. It's one of the best showdown fights in the game. Secondly, Dragon Armory has a very good set of synergies with the Sunstalker Skyreef Sanctuary. They complement each other very well, so I genuinely love a campaign where you have both the Sunstalker and the Dragon King as your Node 3 quarry monsters. I think is immensely entertaining and enjoyable, and it's great the way that some of the shortcomings on the Dragon Armory weapons can be helped by Cycloid Scale armor, and Dragon armor can make a good use of some of the really interesting Sunstalker weapons. So they nicely lace into each other, as well as being the two big 4x4 base monsters. So that's that. We're going to get onto the Dragon Armory now, which doesn't have a lot of thematic things tying together. It's got a slight nuclear theme for a couple of pieces of gear, and they are unusual in they are directly upgraded by other bits of gear. The armor set is, in my opinion, the best reach-based light armor set in the game. It doesn't have the heavy keyword. It doesn't have the flammable keyword either, which makes it great for using against the Sunstalker, which is a negative of the Phoenix armor. So I like a lot that's in here. We're going to have a few comments about some of the bits and pieces, but there's nothing that Campaigns of Death can't tighten up in this, and that takes nothing away from how good the Dragon King is to fight. So before we get into the bits and pieces, quick look at the resources. These are organised in how common they are. So you've got 4 of these two. You've got 3 of the veined wing and the husk. You've got 2 of the dung and the cabled vein. And these 3 at the bottom, there's only 1 of each. Hardened ribs is a real roadblock for constructing dragon armor. It's required to make the dragon mantle, and there's only 1 in the deck. So that can be a real challenge to get unlocked. There's only 1 king's tongue as well, but it's used for the blast shield, and the blast shield is less important than the dragon mantle. On the left here are our strange resources. Quick note just to highlight, somebody usually dies when you get the Radiant Heart. So be prepared for that. They've only got a 20% chance of not bursting into flames and dying. The dice roll's a bit weird as well. Normally rolling high is good and low is bad. It's been inverted here. Which is kind of thematically on point with what the Dragon King tends to do, but most of all, mechanically, be aware that if you get this from a particular hit location, or you get it as a drop from the victory conditions, someone is probably going to die. These 2 are used for pieces of gear we'll talk about. They're for the level 2 and level 3 specific victory conditions, but we'll get there. And right now, let's just get into the armor set. So, before we look at the individual pieces, there are common things between all of these, much like most armor sets. They all have 4 armor points. They all have the armor and set and metal keywords. The Dragonskull Helm is a little unusual because it has the bone keyword, which is not on any of the other bits and pieces. Bone, as I've talked about in the past, is a great little keyword that has a lot of interesting synergies, and also this is a helmet you can use in People of the Skull, who will only wear bone gear. Okay, so let's look at the Dragonskull Helm, shall we? It costs 1 bone fragment. That's the horn. 2 bone and 1 husk, so not too hard to put together. It has a left, right, and down facing red. and if you connect any two of those affinities, you will get +1 to all severe head injury results, and you get to ignore the shattered jaw severe injury results. So this is quite nice to stick on a survivor with a shattered jaw, because suddenly they can encourage again and they can consume, because the jaw of the Dragonskull Helm, one would assume, is hinged and it supports their broken jaw. The top ability though is the really good one. We're looking at normally a 40% chance of death for a head severe injury. The Dragonskull Helm increases your rolls by 1, so 1 becomes a 2, 2 becomes a 3, and 3 becomes a 4, and a 4 is no longer a lethal result, it's a 5. Additionally, a 9 becomes a 10, so you have, and a 10 becomes an 11, which is 10 plus, so you have double the chances of getting the least punishing result as well. So this is a understated but really nice ability to have. 25% reduction of headshots being lethal is quite meaningful, and it will stack with things like tough as well. So it's really a decent and solid little piece of gear. Also, and as we'll look at when we see the layout, it's very easy to get this active. It's not a huge chore, so that is an extra bonus, that you can always have this active in an dragon armor set if you want to, and you probably should. Right, so next up we have the dragon gloves. They have a cost a cabled vein, a husk, a leather, and an iron, so be aware, iron is a big part of constructing this. You need to be on your iron if you're going to move into dragon armor. It's very basic though. It has a right facing green and an up facing blue. The right facing green helps with the puzzle ability for the body piece, the dragon mantle. The up blue is just a little extra bonus you can make use of if you want to. It's obviously, like, down facing blues are a little tricky to get, but you know, you don't need this affinity, so you can't complain that it's there. It's nice that it's there. Right, onto the Dragon Mantle. As I mentioned, this is the one that can be the hardest to construct. It requires a horn fragment, an iron, a hardened ribs, and a leather. So if you do get that hardened ribs, keep it safe in settlement storage until you're ready to craft this. Even if you're not planning to craft dragon armor in advance, given that the hardened ribs is just a bone piece, I don't think you should be using it. I tend to stockpile my hardened ribs as much as possible in case I lose the first dragon mantle because it gets archived for some reason, or in case I decide I want to have a second set, because this is a fairly solid armor set with its decent protections and lack of the heavy keyword. The best thing about the Dragon Mantle is this ability. So if you have, it has an up red, a right blue, a down and a left green, and if you connect all of those, then at the start of the showdown you will gain survival up to the survival limit. This is shared with lantern armor, this kind of ability. It's really good. Knowing that you don't have to be very thrifty with your survival in the hunt phase, because you're going to get a full refresh when you get to the showdown, is very powerful, and it also rewards all of those +1 survival limit innovations that you've taken. Now, the negative we have here is that the armor set itself on the layout doesn't manage to connect the blue affinity, so you're always going to want a left facing blue from something to complete this, because not activating the Dragon Mantle is madness. Like, this is the best ability on the armor set. Get it active every time. It's not something you should skip out on. Right, then we have the Dragon Belt, which, as you can see from its wing-like design, uses 2 veined wings, 1 organ and 1 iron. It has a left-facing red, that means it will slot next to the Dragon Helm, and help the Dragonskull Helm and help activate this. And a down-facing blue. Now, this down-facing blue is really tricky to do, because as we'll look at the layout in a moment, you'll see that it's occupying the same space that wants this left-facing blue. There's not a lot of up and left-facing blue pieces of gear in the game. A lot of them are like, say, the Sleeping Virus Flower, where they have all 4 blue affinities everywhere. There is one that works in the slot in the Dragon Armory itself, but I wouldn't I wouldn't craft it for the affinities. And in fact, this ability here, you are not knocked down from suffering a heavy injury. It's not a major ability. It's kind of just saving a survival here or there. So if you don't get this active, don't worry about it. I often don't anyway. It's fine. It's nice if you can, but you don't need to. This is more important on the Dragon Mantle. Last of all, we have the Dragon Boots. They cost a King's Claw, a Husk, an Organ, and an Iron. They have an up facing green and a right facing red. The up green is the one that will connect to the Dragon Mantle. The red is spare for you to use as you wish. This gives you +2 movement during your act. So, plus movement during your act isn't as good as a permanent plus movement. Because one of the best benefits of extra movement is being able to dash cancel when the monster targets you. That is, so the monster targets you, and before it moves and attacks, you have that survival window, and you will spend a survival and dash away, and then get out of the range of the monster. So it is forced to chase after you, but it lands short and it can't manage to do its attack. So that's like why flat movement is better. It's why the Phoenix Greaves are really quite good. It's why the White Lion Greaves are really good, even though the rest of the armor set has some issues. During your act is nice, but this is kind of purely a positioning and offensive base of movement. So it's a decent ability. It's nice that it doesn't require any affinities for it to be active, but it's like mid-range rather than a very powerful one. Okay, so now we're going to pop down and take a look at the armor set bonus and the typical layout that you'll put this in. Okay, here we go. So here is our gear grid. We'll just zoom in a little bit. Okay, so you can see this is very typical for any piece of gear that has like all the cardinal positions and requires puzzle affinities. You'll stick it in the middle in slot 5. We can see that with the skull at the top in 2, the dragon belt to the right of it helps activate the skull. Dragon gloves are in slot 4 for the mantle, and the boots are down here in slot 8. So we're always looking to fill slot 6 with a left facing blue to activate the mantle. We got choices on the other 3. We can be flexible as we like. You can even like move the dragon belt around a bit if you need to, if you play with the monster tooth necklace over here. Okay, and then we have it's very simple layout. Then we have the dragon armor set bonus, 1 armor to all hit locations, putting you to 5s everywhere, which is solid. And the ability is another one of the monster movement abilities. You spend your Knight and your Lightning Bolt to leap in the air, and you place your survivor on an unoccupied space exactly 5 squares away in a straight line. You then get to activate a melee weapon and attack with +2 accuracy and +5 strength. This is really good. Like +2 accuracy is massive, and +5 strength is a big old chunk. So, but this ability is just fantastic. And it is why I say this is a premium reach armor set, and we'll take a look at that over at the showdown board now so we can kind of discuss what's going on. Right, so here we are. We've got a selection of monsters, and we'll start with this here. So your leap is fairly straightforward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you land. It doesn't matter what is in between these spaces, you just get to do this leap. That's how it works. Now you'll find against a 2x2 monster, if you're adjacent to it, and 2, 3, 4, 5, you see you land out of range for almost every weapon in the game. It has to be a melee weapon, so you can't really get the attack in at all. So this struggles versus most typical monsters and requires a bit of positioning. So it's not something you'll rely on a great deal. But when we get to 3x3 monsters, you'll find, like, for example, if you start off right next to the monster and you leap, you end up 2 spaces away, which means anything with reach 2, 1, 2, can still get to the monster. So that allows for a play pattern of like just jumping back and forth over the monster and having a bit of room to get your attacks in, which is quite nice. That's why it's similar to the way that I prefer to employ Phoenix armor as well. I like to have a reach weapon on Phoenix armor because of that halt point, and it is significant. Reach is a very significant ability. For example, this, when you land, that's your normal threat range for a non-reach weapon, and then if you have your reach weapon, suddenly you've tripled the number of squares you can hit. There is even a reach 3 weapon in the Sunstalker suite that can actually work here. It's the Sky Harpoon. It's a one-handed spear. It's very unique. It's very, very cool, and it's definitely an interesting option. The last quick demonstration is just Leap is super great versus the Dragon King and Sunstalker because they're perfect. It's perfectly designed for you to jump over the top of the monster, land on the other side, and boom, you've got all your bonuses. As long as the monster hasn't moved anywhere, you get to go for it. So this is all fantastic. Obviously, it gets even better if you have ways of moving before doing your leap. So typically that's done with like paint and dash, but it's because of how well it synergizes with reach, that's where I prefer to use it. I'll put a lantern glaive on it, or I'll put a nuclear scythe with the armor set or something like that. I just prefer to have that extra threat range. It works a lot better and it saves survival in the long run because I have to position less often. Okay, let's get on to the rest of the weapons and the items then. We begin with the Dragon Chakram. Unsurprisingly, when you look at its design, this requires 1 horn fragment, 2 organs and a leather. And of course this is the Chakram is made famous by Xena Warrior Princess. It's a weapon ranged thrown bone. It has range 3. When you hit, the monster gains -1 evasion till the end of the round, limit once per attack. It has 2 speed, 6+ accuracy and 3 strength. So this is a don't craft. Its strength is too low. Its range, I don't mind the range being short, but the ability is actually quite good. But when you hit the monster, and this is from a node 3 monster, when you hit the monster and you fail to wound, quite often you're going to have to take some sort of punishment for it. So while this is designed to kind of be a setup weapon, where you throw it and you make everyone else's attacks more accurate for the round, it just can't perform that job. And you add into it the fact that thrown is a weapon type without a proficiency or a mastery, and this is just not really worth doing anything with. It's a cool design, it's a cool idea, it's just not got the stats and the weapon proficiency to back it up, so I would simply leave it in the box. Next up we have the Dragonbite Bolt. This costs 2 radioactive dun to construct, so it is a poop arrow, which is nice. It's an item, ammunition and arrow, so it requires a bow to be able to fire it. It has slow, ammo bow obviously, and devastating 1, which is a good ability. If you wound the monster, it suffers knockback 5. You may use this once per showdown. Its stat profile is 1 with 6+ accuracy and 6 strength. Now, that's where the problem is with this. 6 strength is the same as the clawhead arrow, an arrow you can construct from the white lion. And it even has an on-hit ability instead of a wounding ability, if I remember correctly. Dragonbite Bolt is, on the other hand, this is a node 3 monster, and we should be looking at it being comparable to the hollow point arrow, which has 11 strength. So this thing's got at least 5 or 6 strength, too few for what it is. So again, you should really just probably leave this one in the box. It needs more strength. They really do need in Campaigns of Death to revise the strength on this item, because it just can't do anything particularly impressive. Okay, on to the Talon Knife. This is what I referenced before with this rare and unusual pairing of left and up blue affinities. This one is a weapon melee Katar bone. Yeah, it's a Katar, even though it has the knife in its name. Sure. It's paired, like most Katars. If all of your attack rolls hit, it gains Savage and Deadly into the end of your attack. It has 2 speed, 6+ accuracy, and 4 strength. This costs 2 King's Claws and 2 organs to construct. Now, the affinities are about the only good thing in respect to this weapon. So first of all, like everything else, its strength is about half of what it needed to be for it being a node 3 monster weapon. Like, you wouldn't want to take 4 strength in against a level 1 Dragon King, really. Definitely not a level 2. In contrast, like the Beast Knuckle from the Screaming Antelope is also 4 strength. And I wouldn't say a level 1 Screaming Antelope is anywhere near on par with a level 1 Dragon King. So that's unfortunate. But also, this is one of the only paired weapons with anti-synergy with paired, because this ability, if all of your attack rolls hit, you gain Savage and Deadly, which is nice. That could let you use this as a luck-based weapon. The more dice you roll, the less likely it is that all of your attack rolls are going to hit. Short of a survivor who's got enough personal accuracy that they can be hitting on a 2+, you just don't want to be running this paired, because all of the benefit, all of the power in this weapon is located in this optional, like, triggered ability. And that is really unfortunate. So this is another one that kind of needs to go back to the drawing board, and I wouldn't recommend crafting it at all. Even with Sunstalker Cycloid Scale armor, this still doesn't impress enough because of this problem. Yeah, it's like the inverse of the Spidiculous Guitars, which are really good and reward you for attacking with it and rolling a lot of dice. This punishes you for rolling a lot of dice. Womp womp. Okay, then we have the Blast Shield. This is the King's Tongue plus the Iron to craft. It's got 1 speed, 7+ accuracy, 4 strength. It's a weapon, melee, shield, and metal. It gives you 1 armor to all hit locations. It has block 1, and the first time you block a hit each showdown, you gain the priority target token. That's actually a really solid ability because it allows you to keep the monster focused on you for 2 turns in a row, and this isn't the kind of thing that could be triggering every single turn. That would be too powerful. It would just essentially lock the monster in on your tank until you decided that it was time to stop. So I think this is very fair. The problem the Blast Shield has is defensively, it's a round leather shield that requires iron and a 1-of resource in the Dragon King's deck. And its stat profile isn't particularly great to use offensively. It's definitely better than the round leather shield, but this still isn't what you want on a shield that you're using against Node 3 monsters. So it also has the problem that while it is cheaper than the beacon shield is just more than twice as good. So this is kind of left stranded with nowhere really to go. It's a similar problem with the scrap shield, but at least the scrap shield has a useful red affinity. This doesn't have any affinities. So this is another one that kind of I wouldn't recommend crafting, which I hate saying, but you know, it doesn't really have a place in the game unless you are not looking to craft beacon shields at all for some reason, but even then you might as well be just using the round leather shield. Because that's cheaper. It doesn't require iron, it just requires leather, hide and a bone. So I hope this one gets a revision in Campaigns of Death and either gets like 2 armor points to all hit locations or gets say block 2 or deflect 1. Something to distinguish it from the 2 shields which are below and above it in the progression list. It needs something to make it stand out. So unfortunate. I like the visual design of it though, it's pretty cool, and the name's fantastic. Okay, it's not all doom and gloom though, we're on to the Shielded Quiver. This leather item requires a cabled vein, 2 veined wing and 2 leather. It has no affinities, but its ability is you may activate and gain the benefits of each arrow grid in your each arrow gear in your grid 1 additional time each showdown. So that's most arrows. Really only the Vespertine arrow, which archives itself after use, can't make a huge benefit from this. The dense bone arrows from the Giga line don't really benefit from this either. But the other arrows are absolutely fantastic. I've got them here so we can like have a real quick look at 3 arrows in particular that I like using a lot with this quiver. The Clawhead arrow, obviously on a hit, the monster gains -1 evasion. If you can do that twice in a in a showdown, then suddenly everyone's got the equivalent of +2 accuracy. That's really, really helpful. The gloom-coated arrow, which we will talk about in full soon when we get to the Slenderman, has this amazing ability where you get to like try and wound each hit location, and then they go back on top of the deck, so you have perfect information of what hit locations there are based on the number of hits. Being able to do that twice with a deadly arrow is really great. So fantastic. But the big one is the hollow point arrow from the Phoenix. So not only does this have exactly the stat profile you'd expect for a Node 3 arrow, on a hit the monster gains -1 movement to use once per showdown. So suddenly one hollow point arrow, if it hits twice, gives the monster -2 movement. That improves the range at which you can dance around the monster and avoid its hits and do dash cancels and things, which is really powerful. And if you want to see the game bend and break, you can play a 4-bow party, and everybody has a shielded quiver and a hollow point arrow, and if all of them connect with those shots, which, you know, unlikely but is possible, the monster may have -8 movement from tokens, which means it's down to 1 movement for many monsters in the game. It turns out when a monster has 1 movement, it's kind of helpless. It really can't do very much at all. It can only especially when everyone's using bows so they can keep distance on it. It's funny. It is an interesting thing to do, but it does break the game in a way that effectively removes the capabilities of the game system to be able to fight back against you. So it's more of a curio than anything else, but I do think like having 1 hollow point arrow with a shielded quiver, that is very, very good and can make some serious difference. It is in showdowns, like by changing thresholds where you can dash away. Worth noting, this doesn't play well with the Sunstalker quiver because that sets the arrows outside of your gear grid. This wants them in your grid. Obviously this gets better the more arrows you can fit into your gear grid, so you're probably running at least 2 arrows, maybe even 3, which means possibly you want to have an archer with, say, crystal skin, because they don't have to have any armor on to get a little bit of protection, just to free up slots. Okay, next up we have the Blast Sword. This costs a horn fragment and 3 organs. It's a weapon melee sword bone. It has block 1, and whenever you spend an activation to block with this weapon, you gain 1 survival. It has an up facing green, a down facing red, and a stat profile of 2, 6+, and 4 strength. So previous comments about low strength still apply. This definitely should be a 7 or 8 strength weapon, but it kind of doesn't matter, because what you actually do with the Blast Sword is this is block 1 with a surge every single turn without draining your survival. You can literally just spend your surge to get block 1 and have it on you, which is fantastic for survivors who want to be up close to the monster, but don't really want to sacrifice their offense. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't work with Blood Paint. That is because Blood Paint activates the weapons adjacent. This requires you to have spent the activation when blocking with it, but it is still nice to have the option to continuously block and gain survival for a frontline damage dealer if you have space for it and you're against a monster that tends to be a little unpredictable in how it attacks. Okay, we're on to the exciting ones now. This is the 2 nuclear weapons. There is the Nuclear Knife and the Nuclear Scythe. The Nuclear Scythe is probably the better of the 2, so I'm mostly going to focus on that. So we'll briefly run through the Nuclear Knife. Cost a Radiant Heart, 2 Horn Fragment and 2 Scrap. It has this pair of blue affinities that the Dragon Armor was looking for, so that's nice. It has 3 speed, 6+ accuracy and 3 strength. The weapon melee, dagger and nuclear keyword. Nuclear keyword is relevant, and its ability, if you have its green, its red and its blue affinities connected, either of the blue affinities, then the edge ignites. You suffer 3 brain damage on your next, and then on your next attack with this weapon it gains devastating 1. You can do that once per round. It is generally better to have devastating over just surging for a second attack, because it kind of concentrates everything and you draw less hit locations. So that is quite a nice benefit there. But the trouble with the nuclear knife is, like many daggers, it's not got enough strength. And this is a weapon that typically has either killed someone for you to make it, and or required you defeating the level 2 Dragon King to unlock, because you don't often get a Radiant Heart from the level 1 Dragon King. So honestly, this knife should be somewhere between 8 and 10 strength, and it's not. Like many of the weapons in this suite, it feels like it was designed with the idea that all of these weapons would have +5 strength because you'd be leaping with them. That's not the case. But you can do some neat stuff with this if you want to use it with Cycloid Scale Armor from the Sunstalker, which will work very well and let you just be in the blind spot and stabbing with a fairly solid knife because of how the Cycloid Scale Armor gives it sharp. Now, of course, there is a core that gives sharp as well, but with a nuclear knife I don't think it's worth pursuing. I would rather just combine this with Cycloid Scale Armor and play more of a like shadowy assassin type playstyle. So let's move on to the nuclear scythe. Weapon melee scythe, two-handed nuclear. It's got an up and down red and a left blue affinity. It has the same ability as the nuclear knife if it's activated with the red, and the blue. So you can get Devastating 1 onto this. It also has Reach 2, which synergizes really well with Dragon Armor. Its speed is 2, fine. Accuracy 6+, fine. Strength 4, bit too low. But because of Reach 2, you can actually use this very well with Dragon Armor, as I talked about when discussing the armor set. So despite this low strength, and I do think this strength should be doubled to like 8, because this is a prestigious weapon. It costs a Radiant Heart, 2 King's Claw, and 2 Scrap to construct. That's, again, you know, Radiant Heart is an expensive resource to get your hands on. It just could be a bit better. However, this one is definitely worth upgrading. So as you defeat the level 2 and the level 3 Dragon Kings, you'll get access to the Pituitary Gland and the Shining Liver. And each of these, along with an iron, crafts these two unique, and well, they're not mechanically unique, that's in the keyword, but they're just very unique in the game, in that they provide upgrades to nuclear weapons. Now, while I would rather just get sharp on the nuclear knife via Cycloid Scale Armor, Deadly 2, on the other hand, is really interesting. But even with the Scythe, just the red power core does an awful lot. It gets the nuclear scythe up to a base average 5.5, so between 5 and 6 strength, which is very, very good. But we also have the benefit of scythe, which we'll look at before we wrap up. So typically you will craft both of these through a campaign. You will use the nuclear scythe with the red power core at first, and then normally I pivot purely into the blue power core. This is because these don't have any affinities, even though I really feel like they should. I mean, the red power core, blue power core, you know, but they don't have that. Fine. Maybe it'll get addressed in the future, maybe not. But anyway, putting both of them into the gear grid is a bit much, but putting the blue power core in and then stacking a lucky charm on top of that can get you going places really well. That's a 7+ critical wound roll, and the red power core with nuclear scythe is fine as well. You can also run all three if you have space for it. So I think this is really interesting as mechanics go. It's expensive as heck to make all of this. It's very sloth intensive, but it is a lot of fun. And on top of all of that, Scythe has its own proficiency and mastery. So this proficiency is very unique. When you critically wound with the Scythe, you roll 1d10. On a 6+, you shuffle the hit location deck. So you don't shuffle in unresolved hit locations, and it's worth noting that mechanically, whenever you're told to shuffle the hit location deck, the discard pile goes into the deck as well, unless you're told not to do it. There are like cards you'll find that expressly say you do not shuffle the discard pile in, but this one does, and it works on critical wounds, so that links nicely with the blue the blue core, and it's a 50% chance of effectively refreshing the deck, which gives us an alternative to Scythe for hit location, refreshing, and control to minimise hitting the trap. The mastery is very simple. If you're insane, at the start of your act you get +1 activation, which you can only spend to activate scythes. So this clearly has a little bit of counter synergy with the Edge Ignites ability. You're probably not Edge Igniting if you are activating, but it's not a huge deal. Like having 3, effectively it makes the Nuclear Scythe sentient. It requires you to be insane to get the benefit of that extra activation. It's absolutely worth it. Really, really worth it. And if you do happen to have a survivor who has very deep pools of insanity, you can even use it to ignite and do the thing. But just swinging twice with the scythe without having to surge is also really good. Right. I picked up the blast shield. So there we are. That's the Dragon Armory, and to very briefly run through everything that's left, Dragon Armour is arguably the best light armour in the game, especially for two-handed weapons, although there is absolutely an argument that Phoenix Armour is better, except when facing Sunstalkers because of flammable. When it comes to the weapons, for the most part, they're not really good enough to worry about, with the exception being the Nuclear Scythe, that can be really nicely upgraded and has a unique set of abilities, the Nuclear Knife when used with Cyclone Scale Armour, and the Blast Sword when used as a source of surging into block, so they're all fairly decent. The other really big hitter is the Shielded Quiver, which just adds a whole new lease of life to arrows by letting them work twice as often. That's a very powerful piece of gear. Now, the last thing to mention before we wrap up is you might be looking at this and going, ooh, that's a lot of not great weapons that need more strength. Why is Fen so high on the Dragon King as a quarry monster? Well, there's 2 additional benefits which are not expressed in the Dragon Armory. The first of which is the Dragon King creates lava pools when you fight it, and then during its meltdown it will turn those lava pools into obsidian pillars, and you can break those obsidian pillars to get iron. So the Dragon King is a reliable source of in-showdown iron, as long as you're able to break the pillars and get it from it, which is fantastic. Secondly, there's a lot of elements of the Dragon King where the radiation that it puts out upgrades survivors. It's a great place for your survivors to get stronger and more powerful in the showdown. A lot of stat boosts and other bits and pieces are available there. So there are more benefits to fighting the Dragon King than just purely its gear. But I do think that the Dragon Armour, the Blast Sword, the Nuclear Scythe, and the Shielded Quiver are all absolutely worth pursuing when fighting, and of course you'll want those cores when you have that scythe. So that is the Dragon Armory. That is a reason to go fight the Dragon Godzilla of Kingdom Death, beyond it just looking really cool. And until next time, while you're out there in the darkness, happy hunting.